While claiming to be in Libya purely for imminent humanitarian concerns, the United States dropped 45 2,000-pound bombs containing depleted uranium in the first 24 hours of the attack. What is depleted uranium, and how does it affect life long after the bombs are gone? Experts have said that the rising cost of this war could easily pass $1 billion. And just what is all this war about anyway? That's our show this week on American Dream. I'm your host, Nisa Islam. Just what is depleted uranium? America uses it regularly in war. Depleted uranium was used widely, especially in 2003 in Baghdad, Samarra, Mosul, and other big Iraqi cities. While the Pentagon has continued to claim against all scientific evidence that there is no hazard posed by depleted uranium, U.S. troops in Iraq have reportedly been instructed to avoid sites where these weapons have been used. Cities in Iraq where depleted uranium weapons were heavily used are now showing high rates of birth defects, many of which, along with unusually high rates of leukemia, medical experts say are emblematic of fetal radiation damage. There are reports of a dramatic increase in the incidence of deformed babies being born in the city of Fallujah, where depleted uranium weapons were in wide use during the November 2004 assault on that city by U.S. Marines. On the streets of D.C., I asked people if they even knew what depleted uranium was.
I don't know. Depleted uranium? I don't know.
I have no idea.
I have no idea. I have no idea.
I have no idea.
Some type of nuclear byproduct that's unhealthy for human beings, I'd imagine.
Depleted uranium is what they use in shells for anti-tank piercing rounds, I think.
As you can see, most people don't even know what America is using in war. We asked our experts if they could explain what depleted uranium is and why Americans should be concerned. Brian Becker heads the largest U.S. peace movement, Answer, Act Now to Stop War and End Racism.
Depleted uranium is a metal heavier than lead that's being used by the U.S. for all of its munitions now. It's designed to be able to have bombs and missiles penetrate armor, in other words, to go through tanks. But it's an untested weapon, and it's made of depleted uranium, and the half-life for depleted uranium could be hundreds of thousands and perhaps millions of years. So when the war ends, when the bombing stops, the depleted uranium in thousands of pounds of it, tons of it, will remain all over Libya, with health consequences that are not yet known because the Pentagon has never fully tested it. But we know when they used depleted uranium weapons for the first time in Iraq and later in the 1999 Yugoslav war, in the years afterwards, there were many anomalies in birth defects, in childbirth. There were many illnesses that were unexplained for the soldiers and the civilian population that were around depleted uranium. And so as the United States uses depleted uranium in the bombing campaign against Libya, designed to protect civilians, we're told by the UN resolution, undoubtedly the health consequences will go on for civilians, not just now, not just next month, but for years and, in fact, for generations to come.
Todd Harris is a senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments. He explains what depleted uranium is.
Well, depleted uranium, my understanding is it's one of the materials that's used in some of the rounds that are fired from the A-10 aircraft. It's a very dense material, that's why they use it, so it makes for a better round, better than lead. Part of the problem is that can cause some contamination in the environment where these rounds end up. Over time, that's something that people may want to clean up if it's in a populated area, or find a good way to dispose of it.
I also asked Mr. Harris about the cost of war. Can America afford another war? What has America spent so far, and how much is this war likely to cost?
Well, it's a good question. If you look at the cost right now, we've already spent, according to the Pentagon, about $550 million on the first 10 days or so of this conflict. Now, costs are not going to continue at that rate in the future because there were a lot of upfront costs to establishing the no-fly zone and making it safe for our aircraft to operate over Libyan airspace. But it looks like the ongoing cost will run probably somewhere in the range, I would estimate, of $30 million to $100 million per week. Not all of that cost will be bared by the United States. If our NATO and Arab partners pick up much of the burden for enforcing the no-fly zone, our cost could be as little as the Pentagon has estimated to be about $10 million a week. So in the larger perspective of what we're spending on defense and even what we're spending on the conflict in Afghanistan right now, this is quite small. So in that sense, we can certainly afford it because we're only talking about at most maybe $1 billion, $2 billion this year compared to our national deficit, which is $1.5 trillion. So this really does not make much of an impact on our fiscal situation. But politically, I think it does become more challenging for the administration to justify why they're spending millions and hundreds of millions of dollars in Libya when there are a lot of other areas in our own government that are getting less funding than they would like.
Mr. Becker, can America afford another war?
Well, that's a big question. Can America afford the war? Because the government and the state governments and local governments are telling working people in America, we're broke. We have no money. That's why the unions have to be crushed. That's why teachers have to be laid off. That's why hospitals have to be shut down. In the first week of the Libya war, the United States dropped 200 cruise missiles. Each of them cost $1.5 million. That's over $300 million just for those missiles. Then they have to be replaced. That's another $300 million. By the week's end, that's $1 billion in armaments to shoot people, kill people in Libya. So obviously the country is not broke. Otherwise, it wouldn't have seemingly limitless resources to bomb poor people. But as Dr. Martin Luther King said during the Vietnam War, the bombs dropped in Southeast Asia and Vietnam were bursting in the inner cities of the United States, meaning you can't have a war on poverty. You can't deal with the problem of unemployment and the need for services and at the same time spend all of that money for war. So in that sense, I would say no, the people of the country can't afford it.
America is in her third war with a Muslim country, which has many Americans upset. At a recent press conference, people from around the country shared their concerns about the war in Libya.
Once again, the United States government is involving itself militarily attacking yet another country. Ask yourself, which country in the world from its beginnings to the present time has the bloodiest history of genocide, slavery, invasions, and mass destructions, including the use of atomic weapons? Which country imprisons its own people at the highest rate in the world? And of course, the answer is the United States. When we review the United States' recent war history, from Vietnam to the invasion of Grenada, Panama, Iraq, Afghanistan, the continuous dropping of bombs by drones in Pakistan, as well as the contradictory foreign policy support of dictators and monarchies in Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Bahrain, and Jordan, we know no good can come from the United States and NATO imperialist intervention of any kind in the affairs of the sovereign nation of Libya.
Barack Obama took the airways a couple of days ago and began to talk about why it was that it was in the national strategic interest of the United States to bomb Libya. Well, the organization that I came from wondered who these nationals were, because no one asked us. No one has defined what is in the national interest of the masses of black and poor working class people in the United States. So when Barack Obama begins to talk about the strategic national interest, he's talking about the domination and domineering of corporate America.
How many of you have picked up a newspaper and read about the demonstrations in Italy and Pakistan, the demonstrations in the Far East, the demonstrations in France, the demonstrations in London, not just demonstrations against Gaddafi, but demonstrations against the United States bombing and talking about a regime change, and you haven't read it. The demonstrations across America. So Brian, to make your point, the media has taken a position, and it is true that they have taken a position, and the position is to demonize Gaddafi throughout the world. And being that the American people who stopped learning geography in school, they didn't know where Libya was until they put it on CNN and showed them a map. If you asked during the Vietnam conflict, show me Vietnam on the map, they could not show it to you. But the important thing to remember, the lesson of history, is that the Vietnam campaign in the streets, and Bryant, you said it right, if you take it to the street, you can turn it around. They had to come out of Vietnam because it had divided America, and the corporate entities of America were attacked because it was not a war for the liberation of people, but it was a war for the corporate greed of America. In the book that I reviewed on Press TV called Washington Rules, the man opens up talking about the last words of Dwight Eisenhower. And his last words, and warning the American people, you have to be careful of the industrial military complex. Because everything, this war, when they look at the bombing of Libya, there are people sitting down calculating, as I stand here, how much it will take to rebuild it. When they went into Kuwait, $190 billion to rebuild Kuwait, and America got 80% of those contracts. So it becomes big business under the guise of a humanitarian move that we're trying to save civilians.